Welcome to History Explained, where we illuminate the past to better understand our present. I'm your guide for this weekly journey, 7 days of global change in under 7 minutes. Today is Friday, July 11, 2025, and this is Economic Milestones, where we explore the pivotal financial developments shaping our world. This week, the global economy showed signs of redirection, not with shockwaves, but with subtle recalibrations in policy, trade, and innovation that echoed past transformations. We begin in Brussels, where on July 2nd, the European Central Bank announced a long-anticipated rate cut, its first since early 2023. President Christine Lagarde framed the move as cautious optimism, in the face of stabilized inflation and slowing industrial contraction. For many analysts, it marks the end of Europe's longest tightening cycle in 2 decades. Echoes of 2014's post-crisis Eurozone strategy are unavoidable, but this time, green energy investment and AI infrastructure are the targets, not austerity. Across the United States, the Department of Labor reported on July 5 that freelance and gig economy jobs have surpassed traditional full-time employment for the first time in recorded history. The shift, driven by automation, remote work trends, and platform-based labor, is being called the Great Reclassification. Economists are comparing it to the industrial transition of the early 1900s when factory jobs overtook agriculture. But unlike the Fordist model, today's shift is decentralized, individualized, and often precarious. In Kenya, a historic economic agreement was reached on July 3 between the government and the African Union's Digital Finance Consortium to pilot AfriPay, a continent-wide mobile currency standard. The digital tender, backed by a basket of regional currencies and commodities, will launch in 3 pilot cities by year's end. The vision? A unified, mobile-first financial system that leapfrogs traditional banking, recalling the early days of M-PESA, but scaled for continental integration. If successful, AfriPay could do for African commerce what the euro once did for Europe on mobile. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the Ministry of Trade unveiled a $12 billion strategic investment fund focused on rare earth mineral processing, signaling a major pivot away from reliance on Chinese supply chains. The move follows a week of tense trade negotiations with Beijing and mirrors Japan's semiconductor independence strategy from the 1980s. History shows that trade dependence often becomes geopolitical vulnerability. Seoul is betting on vertical integration and national resilience. And finally, in Argentina, a surprising economic surge made headlines. On July 1, the National Institute of Statistics reported the country's first quarterly trade surplus in nearly 4 years, driven by record lithium exports and tighter fiscal controls. The turnaround comes under President Javier Milei's controversial economic stabilization program, which has sharply divided the nation. To some, it recalls Carlos Menem's 1990s reforms, rapid growth followed by deep social fractures. The question now is whether Milei's model is sustainable, or just another boom before the bust. From digital currencies in Africa to labor market upheaval in America, from policy pivots in Europe to resource strategies in Asia, this week reminded us that economic change rarely arrives all at once. It builds, quietly, steadily, until the old models no longer hold. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Economic Milestones. If these developments made you think differently about how the world creates and redistributes wealth, subscribe, share, and tell us in the comments, which of these shifts do you believe will define the decade ahead? Tomorrow, we shift our focus to military history, examining the conflicts and strategies that shaped our present. Until then, I'm your guide for History Explained, where understanding yesterday is the key to navigating tomorrow.